Hello and welcome to the Capitol Report on NTD News. I'm your host, Melina Weiskup. Defying threats from China, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy meets with President Tsai of Taiwan in California, and lawmakers from both sides of the aisle are coming together to voice support. NTD's Iris Tao has more.
Good evening. This is a historic meeting as it made House Speaker Kevin McCarthy the highest-ranking U.S. official to meet with a Taiwanese president, and is also significant in that it marks an extremely rare bipartisan moment as members of both parties came together to talk to the Taiwanese president and voice support for Taiwan and democracy. Here's what Speaker McCarthy and Taiwanese President Tsai said after their meeting at the Ronald Reagan Library in California today. Let's take a listen.
Republicans and Democrats united together in a place that symbolizes the freedom and the commitment, and the bond it's only become stronger with the president with us today.
In our efforts to protect our way of life, Taiwan is grateful to have the United States of America by our side.
And this meeting is also very significant in that it comes as China is threatening to retaliate if McCarthy and Tsai do end up meeting, which they did. We know that China claims Taiwan is part of its own territory and has always opposed any interactions between U.S. and a democratically ruled island. But today, the lawmakers say they're not going to bow to China's pressure. And here's Congressman Mike Gallagher, the chairman of the House Select Committee on China, speaking at a press conference afterwards.
Some who failed to learn from decades of CCP behavior have been wringing their hands, wondering if we're being too provocative. But I would submit to you that if the duly elected leader of one of our most important Democratic partners can't meet with American leaders on American soil, then we're merely feeding the crocodile that will eventually eat us.
And regarding Speaker McCarthy will visit Taiwan as he did, as his predecessor Nancy Pelosi did, McCarthy basically cited his response to my question at the White House in February, saying that China cannot tell him where to go at any time and any place.
Trump's appearance at a Manhattan court yesterday got the attention on the international level. Foreign heads of states, American lawmakers, and more are now reacting to the Trump arraignment. Meanwhile, Trump's legal team and even some Trump critics say they're questioning the strength of the case. NTD's Arian Pazdar has more on what people have to say about the unprecedented legal battle.
Donald Trump's lawyer, Joe Tacopina, says he doesn't believe the case against the former president will make it to a jury. Trump was charged with 34 counts of felony falsifying business records. While on NBC, Tacopina explained that Manhattan's local prosecutor, Alvin Bragg, can't handle a federal case.
The only way to make this a felony is to cobble together a couple of misdemeanors, the false business records and the attempt to cover up another crime. But the indictment doesn't even list what the other crime is.
It's not only Trump supporters who seem to think this way. Liberal legal analyst Ian Millhiser wrote on Vox that Bragg has built one of the most controversial and high-profile criminal cases in American history upon the most uncertain of foundations. Also, the attorney who filed a complaint against Trump in Georgia says New York's 34 charges against Trump are basically just one crime, saying, "I think even a jury, which may not have too much legal expertise, is going to look over this and say, well, this is repetitious." The former president spoke in Florida after the Tuesday arraignment, saying the people in charge of the case have a bias against him.
I have a Trump-hating judge with a Trump-hating wife and family whose daughter worked for Kamala Harris and now receives money from the Biden-Harris campaign.
House Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez commented on those statements, saying he is publicly intimidating a judge and pointing a spotlight on their family to his supporters, many of whom have admitted in court to committing violence in his name. NBC reports that the judge presiding over the case and his family already received dozens of threats against them. However, besides AOC, most Democrats haven't spoken out about the charges. Neither top House Democrat Hakeem Jeffries nor Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has spoken on the issue since the arraignment. Meanwhile, House Republicans on Wednesday said they'll get together this week to decide how to continue probing Bragg's investigation. Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke at a NATO meeting in Europe on Wednesday, saying Trump's arraignment in New York
actually did not come up in my conversations with NATO colleagues, nor did I get questions about the durability of our approach. I think people are very focused on what we're actually doing.
Meanwhile, Mexico's president on Wednesday said he doesn't agree with the charges against Trump, indicating that political opponents are trying to stop the former president from running again in 2024.
They shouldn't use the supposedly legal issues should not be used for electoral political purposes. That's why I don't agree with what they are doing to ex-President Trump.
As of right now, Trump can still run for office in 2024. After Trump's indictment, El Salvador's president said, sadly, it'll be very hard for U.S. foreign policy to use arguments such as democracy and free and fair elections or try to condemn political persecution in other countries from now on. The court hearing for Trump is scheduled for December, shortly before the Republican primaries. Trump's team is expected to file a motion to dismiss before then. Reporting by Arian Pazdar, NTD News.
Joining us next to discuss former President Trump's indictment and the arraignment yesterday, we have Stephen Allen, who's the vice chairman of the Conservative Caucus. Allen is also a lawyer and a journalist. We'll get his reaction on how the media is covering the case. Dr. Stephen Allen, vice chair of the Conservative Caucus, thank you for joining me.
Great to be with you.
So I want to talk about yesterday. Obviously, this is the biggest news of the week and will be for much longer as we approach the 2024 presidential election. So as far as the media coverage around Trump's arraignment, the judge didn't allow videography inside the courtroom, but there were photos taken. And now Trump is using this to his advantage, actually making T-shirts with his created mugshot that wasn't even taken, so he's trying to use it to boost his campaign. Can you speak a little bit to this?
Yeah, that photoshopped version of mugshot even has 45, 47 on there, indicating that he was the 45th president and hopes to be the 47th. The Trump people are really good, the president himself and his people, at taking lemons and turning them into lemonade, at taking an attack and turning it against the attacker. And in this case, they're doing what they have to do. You have to, in politics they call it lampshading, where you hang a light on the thing that the other side wants people to know about you and make it into a positive thing. So in this case, it's, yeah, they're indicting me, yeah, they're trying to put me in jail. It's because I'm the person who's representing you, I'm the person who's standing up for your values. They could come for you next if they can come for me, and I'm what's standing between the bad guys and the average American, and that's the point they're trying to make.
And we were just explaining a little bit before this interview about how, you know, you've had a wealth of experience in the political journalism field, and you were explaining to me how in the past, you know, the journalists would be looking at the prosecutors in this instance and saying, hey, there's no evidence here, or there's a lack of evidence, but now it's the complete opposite. Journalists are making light of the situation. Could you share with us?
It's frustrating to see that because I'm a lawyer as well as a journalist, and there are people on TV now who are brought in as legal specialists because they're lawyers and journalists, and yet they don't have the slightest interest, with a couple of exceptions, they don't have the slightest interest in whether this indictment is legitimate. It's clearly illegitimate. It doesn't even specify what the crime is that Trump was supposedly covering up, which is necessary for this to be a felony and necessary for the statute of limitations to not have expired. So the whole thing depends on that, and it's not in the indictment. Well, why aren't they pressing on that? I mean, I think there was a question at the press conference yesterday, but why aren't they pressing on that? Why don't they mention that in a way that the average person can hear it and go, that's not really legitimate. This is going after somebody because of who they are and not because of what they did. And you have a prosecutor who was elected on the promise of getting Donald Trump and is trying to get Donald Trump. It's not how we're supposed to run things in this country.
And this kind of speaks to a broader issue with the cultural issues that we're seeing with the decline of truth. Like you mentioned earlier, we're living in a post-truth environment. What do you think are factors causing journalists to take this direction rather than sticking to the truth? I'm a person who wouldn't think that they have a bad agenda. Maybe it's just the fast news cycle. What is your perspective on why they're taking this route?
They live in a bubble. They don't pay attention to sources on the other side. You know, I've given speeches where I've said something and the person would come up to me afterwards and say, well, that sounds like something Fox would say. All they care about is who's saying it. They don't care whether it's true or not. I started out as a reporter, and my partner in doing that was actually the opposite of me politically. But you couldn't tell which side either one of us was on from our reporting. I would write his scripts, he would write my scripts. never made any difference because we were reporting what was true. These folks, you can tell right off the bat, you can watch them for 2 minutes and you know what side of the political equation that they're on, and that should never be the case for reporters. It's really sad to see the decline of journalism in that way, that you have people who more serve one particular side. You know, they know that, well, we're on MSNBC and all the people who watch us have one particular point of view, and we're going to buttress that and make them like us, you know, that rather than tell them what they need to know. It's unfortunate that journalism has taken that path.
And it's really a disservice to the American public because they're the ones who have to cast their ballots. They're the ones who are relying on media to be that middleman, to do all of the research so that those viewers do not have to, viewers or readers. Now, switching gears a little bit more to your expertise about the injection of funding in local elections. You were explaining to me how there are oftentimes more government funding sent to nonprofit organizations that then reach out to grassroots levels, and that really impacts the way elections are, like we saw yesterday with Chicago, the Chicago election.
And the Wisconsin Supreme Court race. What people who are not into politics hardcore often don't understand how much of politics the victories are determined by the rules of the game. I often say to a football fan, I'll say, well, how would it change football if a field goal was suddenly worth 20 points? Well, it would advantage the teams that have the really good kickers, right? It would completely change the game. Well, that's what happened in 2020 and in 2022. And one of my other fields is epidemiology. I know that nothing they did was to prevent people from getting the coronavirus in all the election law changes. What they were doing with early voting, mail-in voting, expanding, was to advantage one side, the side that has a bigger grassroots organization. Well, is that because they work harder? No. It's because they get money from nonprofit organizations that are tax exempt, often funded by woke corporations, and they get money from the government. And so our own money is being used to shift the political balance. Remember before the last election in 2022 that the Biden people actually brought in all the nonprofits to work with them on getting people registered and getting them to the polls because they knew that would advantage the Democratic Party. And Sam Bankman-Fried, the fraud artist, actually told people not to give to his political action committee because it was so much more effective, 4 to 10 times more effective, he said, to give to these nonprofits in turning out the Democratic vote. And that completely shifts our political balance in this country and needs to be dealt with.
Dr. Stephen Allen, thank you so much for your insight.
Thank you.
Election results from Wisconsin and Chicago are speaking to the national issues of abortion and policing. Wisconsin voters flipped the state Supreme Court to a liberal majority just as the court is soon to face decisions on controversial issues like abortion law. And in Chicago, a city grappling with crime, the city replaces Mayor Lori Lightfoot with a progressive Democrat, Brandon Johnson. Here's what the new mayor-elect has to say about his plans for tackling the crime surge.
We do what works, and that's investing in young people. There's a direct correlation between hiring young people and violence reduction. And so
Johnson will inherit a city in which the number of murders has increased by 20% since 2018. In 2021, there were 804 murders in Chicago, the most in a quarter century. Johnson defeated a more moderate Democrat in the runoff. Both are Democrats, but they are on opposite sides of the ideological spectrum. His challenger, Paul Vallis, preached a law and order message. And in Wisconsin, a closely watched race was by far the most expensive judicial election campaign in U.S. history. Liberal Janet Protasewicz defeated conservative candidate Daniel Kelly in a race for a state Supreme Court seat. The result turns the court with a 4-3 conservative majority to liberal control for the first time in 15 years. This is all ahead of major rulings on controversial issues like abortion laws.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.